So what made you actually look at leucine, for instance, and go, okay, how can we make that much better? We can talk a little bit, not just about like the anabolic effects from it.
And as you know, it was 60% stronger gram for gram at increasing muscle protein synthesis at that 2-gram dose than standard leucine. Because the more I looked at it, it wasn't about the absolute level of leucine that you were consuming. It was about leucine kinetics, that PK, how quick the rise is in plasma. And this is why we see with age a leucine or anabolic resistance, right? Because there's insulin resistance and that peak doesn't happen as fast. So you have to take more and more and more leucine to actually spike muscle protein synthesis with age. The question is not how much, but how quick. And this is where dilucine comes into the equation. Using this PEP1 transporter, it's dramatically faster, 189% faster than standard leucine. And that is where the anabolic effects.
Hello, everybody. This is Chris Gethin. Welcome back to the Chris Gethin podcast. And we are reporting from the Health Optimization Summit out of a trailer. So it's a very high-end podcast that we are reporting today. I'm honored to be in this trailer. How about you, Shawn?
I'm excited to be in a trailer with you.
Of course. And I tell you what, you hold the record now for being a guest on this podcast the most amount of times. 2019, yeah, I think it's 2023, 24, and 25.
Is it 3 or is it 4?
I think it's 4. Hold on. 3 times.
Okay.
3 times.
Right.
So you're holding the record anyway.
All right. Okay.
So
well, that's good.
So no pressure. This better be good.
Oh man, I'm ready. This is the trifecta.
Yeah, the trifecta, baby. So for those people, the listeners, the viewers that live under a rock, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know it'll be hard for you to make it brief because you've got such a colorful history within the industry.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about who Shawn Wells is.
For about 25 years, I've been in the supplement nutrition space. I am a fellow in the International Society of Sports Nutrition, a registered dietitian, a biochemist. I'm known as the world's greatest formulator. I've formulated 1,100 products, patented 40 unique ingredients, spoken 60 countries, have a best-selling book called The Energy Formula.
List all those things off, and I know there's a little bit more that's like the icing. I look at you, I'm like, man, this guy should be like 90.
Yeah.
But no, you've done a lot in your life.
Yeah.
And I guess there's a lot of quality that you put out there. And we're going to talk a little bit about that quality today. So you've come up with some of the most innovative supplements that the industry has ever seen. Obviously, I know you from back in the bodybuilding.com days when I was the editor-in-chief there, and here you are still evolving and bringing groundbreaking ingredients to the supplement world. When you think that the supplement industry is so saturated, you think, is there anything new that could be done? Is there anything really innovative? Isn't it already done? Can't we just stick to the standard supplements that always work? But you seem to break these barriers. You did it with paraxanthine recently.
Yeah.
And of course, we carry paraxanthine in several of our products, the BH2K, the Outlier. We have the paraxanthine with the L-tyrosine. And now you've done it again, but maybe even on a bigger scale, I don't know, with Dilucine. And that has been our #1 launch with Unmatched. And it's been our biggest seller here at the Health Optimization Summit as well. So
can I tell you something real quick before you get into your questions? This is insane. I want you to know that yes, paraxanthine is crazy. People love it. You've got it. You're like one of the first brands to run with it. You're one of the first brands to run with Dilucine, innovative ingredient. And this is not fake. This is not hyperbole. We looked at Dilucine with 50 unique ingredients in the sport nutrition industry, ones I've worked on, ones that are popular. And we did a test with rodents and looked at endurance, strength, a number of markers. And what we saw was paraxanthine and Dilucine had the strongest effect of any combination of any ingredients. What's crazy is now this is preclinical, this is rodent data, right? But one thing that's, I think, super interesting is one of the mechanisms that paraxanthine is working on is, of course, the neurological impact and the adenosine inhibition and neuroplasticity and increased acetylcholine, serotonin, dopamine, increased glutathione catalase, nitric oxide to the brain. But it's also improving muscular contractions with calcium ions. Then you look at Dilucine. It's improving strength. It's improving muscle protein synthesis. Put those two together, that increased muscular contraction and the strength and endurance. We'll get into that in this show with the human data. Incredible combination. Let's look at it the other way. Neuroplasticity associated with paraxanthine, BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Guess what one of the other proteins is that's incredibly important to neuroplasticity? MPS via mTOR, right? We think of, mTOR as just MPS. It's also important in the brain, mTOR, for regenerating new brain cells.
So it's like anabolism for the brain.
Yes, exactly. And we're not talking about mTOR with the brain too much yet, but that data is new. So when we put this together with BDNF and mTOR with Dilucine and paraxanthine, awesome. When we put together the muscular contractions and the strength and more leucine to muscle and more muscle protein synthesis, great combination on that side. So it's actually, when you put them together, like the ultimate synergist that we've seen in our data in my entire 25 years.
Okay, so what made you actually look at like leucine, for instance, and go, okay, how can we make that much better, that it's completely separate to leucine in itself? Because we can talk a little bit not just about like the anabolic effects from it, but the anti-catabolic effect, especially in people that don't necessarily train, which we discussed yesterday.
Yeah, there was like researchers 20 years ago that I was looking at, like Van Loon and some of these guys that like they were looking at like the what was it, PeptiPro? Like, you remember that?
Yeah,
like the casein hydrolysate,
yeah,
or hydrolysate, or however you want to say it. And there was data to show that di and tripeptides actually get taken up faster than free-form amino acids, and certainly faster than intact proteins, like things that are bigger than oligopeptides, like 4 aminos and bigger. And so I was just like, this is interesting. Like, I'm like, leucine, muscle protein synthesis. Well, if it's faster, what if? What if there was a di or trileucine? What could happen? And I always kind of kept that in my pocket, because the more I looked at it, it wasn't about the absolute level of leucine that you were consuming. It was about leucine kinetics, that PK, how quick the rise is in plasma. And this is why we see with age a leucine or anabolic resistance, right? Because there's insulin resistance, and that peak doesn't happen as fast. So you have to take more and more and more leucine to actually spike muscle protein synthesis with age. And this is why we see sarcopenia, not only sarcopenia, but sarcopenic obesity, where you're trading muscle mass for fat mass as we age, right? And so this is absolutely fascinating to me. I'm thinking Dilucine, trileucine, I'm assuming they're faster. What if it does signal muscle protein synthesis better via mTOR? And sure enough, we tried it, and we actually did look at trileucine, by the way, and almost no effect, interestingly. Dilucine, an incredible effect. And as you know, it was 60% stronger gram for gram at increasing muscle protein synthesis at that 2-gram dose than standard leucine. And that is a dramatic difference, a game changer. Basically, and it's not a matter of, if you take 3 grams, 5 grams, 10 grams, that you're going to see more. There's what we call a refractory effect. You know this from like the guys drinking the jugs of BCAAs. It didn't lead to more muscle. There's a refractory effect where the more you consume, it stops, it just shuts off. The question is not how much, but how quick. And this is where Dilucine comes into the equation, using this PEP1 transporter It's dramatically faster, 189% faster than standard leucine. And that is where the anabolic
180.
effects.
180.
189, yeah.
Wow. Okay. And we know, like you mentioned, there is the point of no return. That's why, you'd have certain individuals that would eat, a certain amount of protein, but then they'd try to overload protein into their system to see that they're going to add more muscle. Now, of course, there's going to be some caveats to that. It all depends on how hard that person is training, as well as how much muscle mass that they're holding. But what I found fascinating when I had this conversation with you a few days ago is that with Dilucine, it works in individuals that don't necessarily train as well. So we spoke about people that are on GLPs.
Yeah.
Can we go down that rabbit hole a little?
Yeah. So our in vitro data, where we started out, like looking at the cellular effects, right? When we looked at Dilucine versus leucine, yes, we saw this dramatic speed difference. We saw a dramatic effect in myocytes and muscle cells versus standard leucine, and certainly versus placebo. But one thing that was really interesting, when we look at in our studies, when we look at working out versus not working out, leucine doesn't have an effect on mTOR and muscle protein synthesis when you're not working out.
Nothing signaled.
Nothing signaled. With Dilucine, a dramatic difference. And so that's where like the delta is even greater, that leucine's going to have an incredible effect for repair, for recovery, for anabolism over standard leucine, even on these non-workout days that are absolutely critical to your recovery. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, can we talk a little bit about the transportation? We know, peptides is a hot topic, but, people often ask, well, what is the mechanism here? So I know, we could talk about the PEP1 and PEP2. Like, how does that mechanism of transportation actually work?
So you have your the intracellularly, like the enterocytes along your gastrointestinal tract have these PEP1 transporters. And what's interesting is, I thought, one, it makes sense to think that the smallest amino acid is going to be the fastest. So you think that a single amino acid is fast, and it has to hydrolyze a protein down to get that free-form amino acid. Why would it be that di and tripeptides would somehow be faster? And I did not know this. And again, they get taken up via these enterocytes in this peptide 1 transporter. Why would that be? For years, I had no idea. I was just exploiting this mechanism. Now I understand that di and tripeptides are regulatory peptides, the shortest peptides, and they're going ahead of free-form amino acids. They're faster to go ahead of what will be substrate to build new proteins, to build new tissues. So I didn't know that at the time. Here's what's really interesting with Dilucine. When we look at the data, no one's ever looked at Dilucine in plasma before in all these studies. Every single study on leucine, no one's ever looked at Dilucine. When we looked at it, of course, we saw intact, well, I shouldn't say of course. It was interesting, we saw intact Dilucine in plasma when we administered Dilucine, which is interesting. So it's not just about 159% more leucine getting to muscle and it being 189% faster and 60% more muscle protein synthesis gram for gram. Maybe there's an effect of Dilucine itself. Here's where it got really interesting. When we looked at leucine being administered, we saw Dilucine in the plasma. The body does not waste energy. We actually think, we have not been able to test this yet, but it's very possible that leucine is not the trigger for muscle protein synthesis, that in fact Dilucine is.
Okay.
It's not just faster and a better way to deliver leucine, but it may be the signal itself.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So yeah, this is a way that is kind of like in its pre-digested form, as it were, much like a leuco blue instead of a methylene blue. That leuco blue is like a kind of a more of a broken down version of it that gets absorbed much, much quicker. So it's kind of like another electron kind of added. So that's fascinating. So when you say that, it actually goes ahead of like the amino acids. So you could combine this with other amino acids and it's not going to be competing with each other. So if you used to have EAAs or protein, you could have the dilucine and they're not going to compete.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. It's using different transport, different absorption. So exactly, it's non-competitive, which is really exciting when we're talking about people that are eating heavy amounts of protein, that you can add this to it. Now, think about also your vegan friends that are getting maybe enough protein as a vegan bodybuilder, but the question is the concentration of the protein and the quality of the protein. Vegan proteins tend to be low in leucine. We know that there was a study with Lane Norton and Gabe Wilson, I believe, where they looked at wheat protein hydrolysate, and it took 50 grams of the vegan protein to equal what the 25 grams of whey could equal. And what they found is, so either you got to double the vegan protein or you supplement the leucine difference. And I forget whether it's 1.4 grams or there's some amount of leucine that was needed to equal the whey. And then they saw it was just as anabolic. So dilucine could be the ultimate unlock for a vegan athlete or bodybuilder.
Interesting. Yeah, because leucine is so low in those plant proteins, and then dilucine would be that anabolic response further on top of it. So great for, like, I have a lot of Indian clients, like 62% of the population are vegetarian or vegan.
Right.
So this could be very, very powerful for them.
Yeah. And you mentioned GLP-1s. I did not get to that. So GLP-1s, the glucagon-like peptide, we're hearing a lot about it. Up to 15%, some numbers are saying, of the population has tried it or is on it right now. 93% of our population is metabolically dysfunctional. Certainly, the numbers I've seen are anywhere from 33 to 40% of the population is obese. Certainly, those numbers vary. But there is a massive amount of metabolic dysfunction, of insulin resistance, of obesity and overweight, and leading to the huge excitement and utilization of these GLP-1 drugs. The problem potentially with them is that we're seeing a disproportionate amount of muscle loss when people are using the GLP-1s over what would be the same level of caloric restriction on a standard diet. Why is that? One of the things that I think is happening is the reverse of what I just talked about with dilucine. It's slowing down transit through the gastrointestinal tract dramatically, making you feel full, making you feel bloated, maybe even constipated, but you're not hungry because it's just kind of stuck and slowly moving through your GI tract. You're just not hungry. You're very satiated, right, with this incretin protein. So what does that mean? That means it's slowing down the amount of leucine that's getting to plasma dramatically. Guess what? That's also called anabolic resistance or leucine resistance. And we're seeing that muscle protein synthesis is rarely optimized, right? So now they're losing more muscle than they should be losing. Guess what would be the perfect way to mitigate that risk of losing that much muscle and the tissue that's supporting it, that bone mass that's being lost osteopenically, would be dilucine. Dilucine could be an incredible risk mitigator for GLP-1 use.
Fascinating. Yeah, because as we know, it's just become rampant now I was just doing hydrogen in the Health Optimization Summit, and I saw a TV monitor on another booth, and I could see Ozempic being advertised while this woman is having her hair done, like it's part of their lifestyle now, which is unfortunate if it's used in the incorrect way. But there are obviously strategies with Dilucine where you could prevent a lot of that catabolism if you're not working out, if you're not following a diet as you should do. So, it's good that there's options out there to kind of prevent or offset a lot of the negatives that people are having with a drug that there's an association of a positive outcome. So I want to talk a little bit about the endurance, because I got a question from one of my followers. Okay, perfect. I'm taking Dilucine specifically for muscle. However, my wife competes in marathons. Is this going to have a benefit for her? Could you talk a little bit about, for people that are into endurance sports, maybe CrossFit or Ironman triathlon, could this have a positive effect?
Well, it's going to optimize muscle protein synthesis with or without the workout. It's going to magnify that signal and give you the efficacy of having more muscle gained. And I think when combined with maybe something that would prevent muscle protein breakdown, it could be very powerful, like HMB, for example, and certainly creatine, betaine. Some of those things would be great synergists along with Dilucine. But we do see more endurance. There is, as far as performance and recovery, there was muscular endurance measured in one of our studies where we looked at leg press reps with 80% one rep max. 115% increase in reps with Dilucine. And this is with trained athletes. With leucine, there was a 39% increase. 115 versus 39. And with Dilucine versus leucine, we saw the 200% greater endurance. So, and that was statistically significant. I mean, that's powerful. When we looked at leg press reps, it was a dramatic difference. So I do believe endurance-wise, she would see more benefits. Recovery-wise, more benefits. She'd recover faster. And then, yes, she would maintain more core muscle mass to perform better and maintain her healthy metabolism, healthy immune system, etc.
Okay. And I got another question from a follower as well, is that are these gains or the response that you get from Dilucine, is it positively acute, or is it also positively like chronic? Will it help long term as well? Or do I get off it and now I regret? Do I go backwards, or do you still continue to go forwards?
If you get on and off Dilucine?
Yeah. So for instance, let's say someone says, hey, I'm on steroids and now I get off steroids and I lose all my muscle gains. Is that going to be the same with Dilucine?
I don't. We don't have data on that, but I wouldn't assume that to the same degree. I do think Dilucine is going to be the most potent way to increase muscle protein synthesis, barring steroids. But I don't see that it's going to be like the same type of thing, because you are getting leucine in the diet. You are getting some increase in Dilucine in plasma via the leucine in your diet. Clearly, statistically, we're showing that there's a 60% muscle protein synthesis greater net effect from Dilucine being administered at the same dose as leucine. So it's not the same, but there is some benefit from having a leucine-rich diet, of course. So I don't think, I mean, that would almost be like saying like you're getting off, I don't know, Tren and, whatever, like a powerful steroid stack, and then getting onto a more mild steroid stack. Like I don't think like all your gains go away.
Yeah. And then that follow-up question from that same person was, should I cycle it?
That's a super fascinating question, and I'm really exploring this. from my own health. I mean, you're hearing about rapamycin, right? Inhibiting muscle protein synthesis and potentially longevity. There's some mixed data on humans and whether we should or shouldn't do it. I don't know. And fasting, there's some compelling data, and sometimes people are knocking down that data. It's possible that there might be some kind of protein cycling or something along those lines that we should do. Maybe, we're seeing now like there is effects from these very high doses of protein that we thought, oh, just, 25 grams was you're maxed out. 40 grams, you're definitely maxed out. Now we're going into the hundreds of grams and there's still effects. I think it varies greatly from person to person based on how much protein they're having on a regular basis. I think your refractory effect, your oxidation of protein is going to be there. And I do feel like maybe it's good to kind of feast and fast, to cycle in and out, like to have days with, and this is going to be super controversial, potentially, maybe no protein and then massive amounts of protein. But I don't know. Like right now, it does seem like optimizing muscle protein synthesis at least 2 to 3 times a day is critical. And that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to explore that kind of model. So I don't really have an answer. But It's interesting. I do think there's a lot of future data that's potentially there to explore.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors you have to take into consideration, isn't there? It's like with the fasting, personally, I like to fast. A lot of it is instinctual, though.
Yeah.
Maybe it's on a non-training day. Okay, I'm going to fast today. I hadn't really planned it. And it's the same, if I have clients on like a keto diet, dependent on that person and why they're doing keto. But sometimes I'll do a cyclical approach where, okay, they're keto during the day and maybe I'll knock them out of ketosis in the evening. And by the time they've done their cardio in the morning, they're back in ketosis, depending on that person, if they have that thyroid issues or whatever it may be. So I think there has to be some sort of balance. But again, even with my supplements, I travel everywhere with my fishing tackle box of supplements. Sometimes I take them and I'm religious, and sometimes like, you know what, just not going to take them today.
I do that same thing. I think that's actually really important. I do believe, like when you look at the idea of like exogenous testosterone, right? Like you're doing TRT and you have the exogenous testosterone, your body stops producing endogenous in the body testosterone because it's saying like, why do I need to make it if you're giving it to me?
Yeah.
Right. To boil that down in a very simple way. So maybe it's the same effect. Like you do create these baselines, especially like we see this with antioxidants where the body adjusts and stops producing its endogenous antioxidants as much. And then there's levels that you can hit with supplements that can become pro-oxidant. So I do feel like it does make sense. And I do this intuitively too, is just cycling things on and off, in and out. Sometimes I mega dose things. Sometimes I go days or weeks without it. I go intuitively, and I know that's not very scientific. So, if that frustrates anyone listening, so be it. But I do think that makes sense. With things like adaptogens, for example, I like to cycle them out and switch to other ones. Like maybe these 2 weeks I'm on maca, these 2 weeks I'm on ashwagandha, these 2 weeks I'm on ginseng, this 2 weeks I'm on rhodiola, something like that. But I don't have a clear answer. That would be really hard to get that data.
Yeah, I think, because you've been in the industry for such a long time, you have so much experience, you can kind of go by intuition. There's a lot of people out there, maybe they're more basic or beginners, and they just need some sort of structure. But over time, sometimes you go into the gym, you smell the air, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to do legs today, even though it was supposed to be arms. And you just follow your instincts. And it just comes with a pattern over time of maturity, time in the trenches, and just being present and not distracted. Because we are in a world of distraction where we just kind of follow blindly. And you need to bring yourself back a little bit and be present and maybe, focus on putting yourself into that parasympathetic state so your peripheral vision is out there to make the decisions correctly as opposed to blindly.
I could go down a massive psychedelic type path right now. You're opening the door. But I will say this really quickly, that parasympathetic nervous system I think a lot of people that might be listening now don't even know what that's like. I remember the first time I did a journey and I yawned. I'm like, what is that? I was hyper vigilant all the time. Like, unless it was like 300 milligrams of caffeine and DMAA and, I wasn't feeling it. I didn't understand it. I was not in tune with my body. What I believe happens, this is really important for those listening. There's not the data yet on this, but I will die on this being true, and the data will come. If you're in sympathetic nervous system all the time, you're in fight or flight or freeze, your supplements are hardly working for you.
100%. Totally.
They're not getting digested, absorbed, utilized near to the degree that they could. You want to make your supplements more effective. It's not BioPerine or grapefruit or, the exact timing. Oh, I'm 5 minutes late. Get your nervous system regulated. Get into parasympathetic. Do that meditation. Do that breath work. Do that grounding. You will watch the effects of these ingredients go up dramatically. Take that up another notch. Now do psychosomatic anchoring, where you do affirmations around what you're about to receive, like prayers, like thank you, Lord, for the bounty I'm about to receive. You're grounding, you're getting yourself in parasympathetic, but you're also telling your body what's about to happen. And you're now connecting this food or this drink or this supplement with what it does to benefit your body. Guess what? Even if you did that for weeks and then I gave you the placebo, you'd probably see a dramatic difference just by taking that drink, by taking that supplement that was maltodextrin, because you believe and you know it works and you know what it's doing in your body. You've now anchored it. You've anchored the smell, the taste, the sight. Your body is already doing shortcuts to prepare what needs to be done. So those are things that don't really get talked about in supplements, and I would love to explore more.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And it wasn't until I kind of discovered this, I started tracing my steps back. Obviously spending a lot of time in this industry, and all the same people like the Dorian Yates, the Dexter Jacksons, the Jay Cutlers, and I know people in the UFC world like the Jens Pulver, the George St. Pierre. What I noticed with all these top athletes is that they're so relaxed. They're so calm. They're so chilled. We know who was like the strongest pound for pound powerlifter in the world, lives in Boise, Jesse Norris. Trying to get him to be enthusiastic in front of the camera was very difficult because he's just so relaxed, so chilled. And I honestly believe there was a direct correlation there, because these people consuming their meal, they were in a rest or digest state. Cortisol can be catabolic. It can cause insulin resistance. It didn't look like they had cortisol in their body. And there's books on this, the slow down diet, which it has scientific studies to show if you are distracted and you're consuming food, you're causing resistance and you're not absorbing the nutrients and the micronutrients, so you're wanting more.
Exactly. I've talked about this with alcohol, why a lot of the alcohol data is very confounding, right? And kind of kind of mixed and equivocal at best. Like where you see the data coming out of, let's say, Sardinia, Italy, and they're drinking wine, like it's healthy and it's contributing to longevity and all this. But like in the US, there's some study and it's really unhealthy. Any alcohol is killing you. Why would that be? Well, what if it's about the environment and that psychosomatic anchoring that you're doing around the alcohol? Like, what if you're stressed when you're having alcohol? What if you're pounding alcohol? What if you're at a bar when you're having alcohol and it's noisy and there's music playing and people are hitting on people and, there's someone throwing up and whatever it is. And then there's this Sardinia, Italy thing where they're sipping the wine over a 3-hour meal and they're surrounded by friends and family and having really healthy food, having connection, having support, being able to get some of the things off their chest that's been bothering them. And that's anchored to that taste, that sip of wine.
Yeah.
that's fresh made, that comes from those lands. Oh, wow. Like, is that the same thing? No, those are
Definitely
two
not.
very different things. And guess what? That's why the data is, I think, very confusing.
Yeah, and like you look at longevity, like diabetes or cancer or heart disease, whatever it may be, it's getting worse and worse. Testosterone's coming down. Well, we know our DNA hasn't changed, but our environment has, and the environment is very, very powerful. And going to Sardinia as well, that there is not a term in their language for retirement, so there's no sense of urgency. They're chilled, they're relaxed, they're going to go on. They're looking past their future of retirement. So they're just in that more relaxed state. And this is funny because
They're more present.
much more present. If they are distracted, it's through human connection
Yeah.
with their family, with their loved ones. And when clients come to me and they say, hey, can you give me a diet? Can you give me a training program? Whatever. A lot of them are surprised when I'm like, how long do you take to eat your meal? When do you switch your phone off before bed? And in the morning, how do you start your morning? They're like, I don't want any of this. I want the training. I want what supplement to take. How do I psych myself up before the workout? That's the problem. You're in a sympathetic dominant state all the time, and you're thinking forward, and you're never, ever present. And that's where you have to be connected to your senses. Like you said, when you're eating your meal, your sense of smell, the taste, the texture, how many people got together to put this food in front of your plate, in front of you, that you're just taking for granted. So, of course, you're in that fight or flight and not digestive of rest when you're consuming that meal. So I totally agree with you there. You've got to be in that more sympathetic dominant state. But bringing this back to the dilucine now, okay. Now this was communicated within our Unmatched ambassador group, where they were saying, okay, we take the dilucine post-workout, but should we be conscious of signaling mTOR? Because I did say, well, I discussed this with Shawn, and he said, if you can afford it, take it pre-workout as well. But the concern was, hold on, would we be signaling mTOR too much, and that isn't good for anti-aging or our health span? So do you mind quashing that question?
I mean, that's tough to answer that just kind of broadly without some bio individuality and context from person to person, like a generalized blanket answer. But I would say this, that I go back to the idea of everything's about maximizing and timing and probably cycling on and off, like you're saying. So I'd rather go heavy and hard around my workout, and then maybe on non-workout days, cutting back and being a lot lighter. We don't have data around this. We have this one dose per day schedule where you took it every day for 6 or 8 weeks in the study, and certainly on the workout days. But what I am hearing is that people that do it twice when on days they're working out are seeing a dramatic difference. And I know that's anecdotal data, but I've literally heard it from hundreds of people, and I'm not telling them to do it. They're experimenting on their own. This is all the N of 1 studies out there. And that's what we're hearing. So I would say, one, experiment for yourself, play with it, see if you do see the value, the benefit. I probably would, if I could afford it, do it twice during the workout. And if I was to cut back on any days, maybe it's the off days. But ideally you could do it once a day, probably when you wake up on non-workout days, and then twice, either when you wake up or pre-workout, and then most certainly post-workout.
Yeah. So I train in the morning. So I've been taking it pre.
That makes sense.
And I've been taking it post, and you know me, Shawn, I love cardio. So I've been doing it post cardio as well on my non-training days. So we can, I'll wrap this up in a second, because I know there'll be another podcast coming in. But what's your vision for this peptide, the dilucine's role in sports performance and recovery over, let's say, the next 5 years? Where do you see the supplement going?
Well, one, I'm really excited about, we've only looked at healthy college males. I want to look at certainly the female physiology, and certainly across pre, peri, postmenopausal. That's fascinating. I certainly want to look at clinical applications like with sarcopenia, like just muscle loss as we age, but also cachexia, looking at disease populations, cancer populations. All of that's really important. We know that muscle strength and muscle mass are critical to our longevity. So I know that this is a key longevity discussion. Also, it's probably going to help with outcomes in physical therapy, occupational therapy, etc., in terms of recovery times. But going back to the idea of purely the athlete, I do see this being the next frontier. This is not hyperbole. We've seen the data that what we thought was the gold standard for the last 100 years, leucine, has now been dramatically bested. And so if you're not on dilucine, you're not maximizing your strength, your mass, your endurance, your recovery. Period. It's the new paradigm. And what I do want to prove out is a couple things. I want to look at that neuroplasticity component. I also want to look at the aging athlete, the Chris Gethin, the Shawn Wells. Like, what do we look like as we're aging? Because what we're seeing in terms of rodent models is it's dramatically more effective, like paraxanthine, the older you are. So these incredible effects that you're seeing in healthy young males that can already achieve muscle protein synthesis well and don't have any leucine or anabolic resistance, guess what? It's going to be dramatically better for people our age or older.
Yeah.
So this is where the numbers I'm saying are already dramatic. I believe they could be 2 or 3x more dramatic with age.
Right. Okay. And, I had stem cells in January. I got into a couple of other injuries from a snowboard accident in December. And, I've been doing whatever I can to prevent muscle loss during this time. So, of course, I've been taking Dilucine, but now I go into like a muscle building phase next week as I go back to Boise. So I'm really, really looking forward to putting this bad boy to the test again. And I know you can't talk too much about this, but whatever you can talk about, please let us know. Is there anything exciting in the pipeline coming down the road from Shawn Wells?
I have 70 ingredients that I'm working on right now.
Is that all?
70 ingredients that are, well, no, it's like they're all at different points because some of them just aren't viable right now with the technology that's available. Some of them won't be stable. Some of them have organoleptic issues, which means taste, smell, or stability where they just kind of disintegrate and aren't stable for more than a few seconds or minutes. We don't have the equipment to make them, like I was saying. Like it's just way too expensive. Like there's a price of maybe around 8 cents per dose that like a branded ingredient kind of falls in. Maybe you can go higher a little bit to some degree, but if something's like, I don't know, $1, $2 per dose as a raw material going to a brand, which would end up being many dollars to the consumer, like it's just not feasible anymore. So there's a lot of things that I'm looking at, and some of them just can't come to be. I would say probably 1 out of 10 things that I'm working on actually come to pass, even though they're all great ideas. So there's many things coming. We are looking at more dipeptides, I promise. There's a lot more coming there. I'll leave it at, there's more nootropics coming too. That's an area that I'm super interested in.
Okay, so watch this space, basically.
Yeah.
We'll be having you on the show again. But thank you, as always, Shawn. You're a phenomenal human being and just an amazing brain full of knowledge. And it's always an absolute honor to have you on the show. And thank you very much for bringing Dilucine to Unmatched and thinking of us. And if people want to learn more about you, they want to follow you, they want to ask you questions, where do they go?
ShawnWells.com, SHAWN, ShawnWells.com. I have tons of information there, a free newsletter that goes out every week that's researched. And then at Shawn Wells on most of the social media platforms, SHAWN. There's a lot of infographics, supplement stacks, all that good stuff. I will say one stack that we're working on that's super fascinating is salidroside. We took the active component from rhodiola, the adaptogen, super experiential at a high dose. I had no idea. Like this is like taking like 5 grams of rhodiola. And then we added it with a mega dose of ergothioneine, the ingredient I've been working on, the mitochondrial antioxidant, 50 milligrams of each. And this is the most clean, experiential, nootropic, and adaptogenic like blend I have ever felt. So we're looking at doing research around this combination. I imagine like combining with a little bit of paraxanthine would just be bonkers. But I can tell you, like when I travel and I'm like upside down in China, like it's a game changer. Like this, my immune system, my recovery, my ability to deal with stress. Like I love this blend. So maybe that's something that we can explore together.
Yeah. I'll be expecting a Ziploc baggie for the post.
You got it.
All right. Thank you very much, Shawn. And for you guys wanting Dilucine, you can go to unmatchedsups.com. And until next time, thank you, Shawn. We are out.
Later.